Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
Nobody on Galport Senna wanted to fix the ventilation coupling on level 9. The heat down there could blister skin off a Quillen in 30 seconds, and the chemical residue from the filtration tanks made the air taste like burnt copper. But Nor had 4 arms and bills to pay, so she wedged herself into the crawl space and got to work. She was halfway through replacing a corroded valve when the alarm on the docking level started screaming. Not the emergency kind, the kind that meant something unusual had arrived. Nor dropped her wrench, wiggled out of the crawl space, and followed the crowd of workers heading toward Bay 14. By the time she got there, a wall of bodies had already formed around the docking gate. Nobody was moving forward. Everyone was whispering. A cargo shuttle sat cooling on the landing pad. It was small, dented, clearly civilian. The registration tag on its hull read a designation Nor did not recognize, followed by 3 words that made her stomach drop. Origine, Sol 3. Classification, Deathworld Category, 12. The shuttle door opened, and a single figure stepped out. She was short by galactic standards. Brown skin darkened by years of sun. Black hair pulled back in a thick braid. She wore simple clothes, faded and patched in several places, and carried one bag over her shoulder. Her hands were rough and calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them every single day. She looked around the docking bay with wide, curious eyes. Not frightened, not aggressive, just looking the way someone looks at a new city they have always wanted to visit. The dock workers backed away from her like she was made of fire. One of them fumbled with a scanner and pointed at the woman. The readout confirmed what the shuttle tag already said. Earth, Category 12. The highest lethality rating the Galactic Hazard Index could assign to a homeworld. A planet where the gravity crushed bones, the atmosphere burned lungs, the weather killed without warning, and the wildlife actively hunted anything that moved. And this small woman with the calm eyes had survived there for her entire life. The whispers turned into muttering. Someone said they should call station security. Someone else said they should seal the bay and vent it. Nobody stepped forward, except Nor. She did not know why she did it. Later, she would tell herself it was because someone had to, and she was the closest. But the truth was simpler than that. The woman from the death world looked lost, and Nor knew what lost felt like. You need the labor registration office? Nor asked, her voice shaking only a little. The woman turned to her and smiled. It was a warm smile, gentle and unhurried, the kind of smile that made Nor feel like she had just been handed something fragile and precious. Yes, please, the woman said. Her voice was soft. My name is Ravi. Nor blinked. She had expected growling, maybe a threat display. Every briefing she had ever read about Deathworld species described them as violent, territorial, and incapable of social bonding outside their own kind. Ravi was none of those things. I am Nor, she managed. Follow me. They walked through the lower corridors of the station together, Ravi asking quiet questions about the architecture, the species she saw, the food available at the market stalls. She asked the way a child asks about the world, with genuine wonder, and Nor found herself answering more than she intended to. 6 levels above them, on the polished diplomatic tier of Galport Senna, something very different was happening. Lord Dressen of the Felvari Empire stepped off his command shuttle and onto the reception platform with the weight of a collapsing star. He stood 9 feet tall. Bone plates covered his shoulders and skull like natural armor, thick and ridged and pale as old stone. His eyes were deep set and the color of cooling metal. 400 warships sat in formation outside the station, visible through the observation windows, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a moon. Dressen walked to the edge of the platform, gripped the decorative metal railing with one hand, and crushed it like paper. The twisted metal fell to the floor with a clang that echoed through the reception hall. Station officials bowed. Diplomats from a dozen species stepped back. Cameras from the Galactic Press Network captured every second. I am Lord Dressen, he said, and his voice filled the hall without effort. the Unbroken, commander of the Felvari Third Fleet. I have come to this summit to remind every species present of simple truth. He paused, scanning the crowd with those burning eyes. There is no force in the charted galaxy that can match Felvari's strength. Not in combat, not in will, not in anything that matters. Nobody argued. Nobody ever did. Captain Bryn stood 2 steps behind his lord, hands clasped behind his back, face carefully neutral. He had served Dresden for 11 years. He had watched this performance hundreds of times. The railing, the speech, the display. It worked every time, and every time, something about it made Bryn feel a little more tired. Later that evening, as Dresden reviewed the station's docking reports over a meal he barely touched, he paused on one entry. A shuttle from a newly contacted Deathworld. One occupant, human female. He snorted and pushed the report aside. One creature from a savage rock, he said to Bryn. Hardly worth noticing. Bryn said nothing, but he noted the entry and filed it away in his memory, because in 11 years of service, he had learned that the things Lord Dresden dismissed the fastest were usually the things that came back to bite him. The filtration tanks on level 7 leaked a yellow gas that smelled like rotting eggs and burned the inside of most species' throats within minutes. The Quillen workers refused to go near them. The Brevari workers filed a hazard complaint and walked off shift. The station maintenance chief stood outside the tank room, rubbing his face with all 6 hands, wondering who he could possibly send in. Ravi volunteered. She walked into the tank room without a mask, spent 4 hours chest deep in chemical sludge, replaced 3 cracked seals, and walked out covered in yellow residue, but breathing normally. The maintenance chief stared at her. His scanner showed the air inside that room had been toxic enough to dissolve Quillen lung tissue in under 2 minutes. Ravi wiped her face with her sleeve and asked if there was another shift available. Word spread fast through the grind. The lower district of Galport Senna, where laborers and refugees lived in stacked housing units barely wide enough to turn around in. The Deathworld girl could work in conditions that would kill anyone else. She did not complain. She did not negotiate hazard pay. She just showed up, did the job, and went back to her quarters. Nor found her during a meal break, sitting on a cargo crate in a quiet corridor, eating something from a sealed container she had brought from Earth. What is that? Nur asked, pointing with her upper left hand. Rice and lentils, Ravi said. My mother packed enough for a month. She worries. Nur sat beside her, keeping a careful distance. She was still not entirely comfortable being this close to a Deathworlder, but Ravi had a way of making the space around her feel safe. It was something in her posture, the way she moved slowly and deliberately, never making sudden gestures. What did you do on Earth? Nur asked. Wildlife rescue, Ravi said. She chewed thoughtfully. When animals were hurt or trapped near villages, I helped get them free. What kind of animals? Ravi thought for a moment. Cobras, leopards, elephants sometimes when they got caught in wire fences. Once I had to pull a python off a child. A big one, maybe 4 meters long. It had wrapped around the boy's legs. Nor's 4 hands gripped each other. You touched it? With your hands? You have to be calm, Ravi said simply. If you panic, the snake panics. If you stay gentle, it lets go. It took about 10 minutes. She paused. The boy was fine. The snake was fine. I relocated it to a forest 2 valleys over. Nur could not process this. On her home world, the most dangerous creature was a small insect that could give you a rash. This woman had pulled a giant predator off a child with her bare hands, and then carried it to safety because she did not want to hurt it. She was beginning to understand why the Galactic Hazard Index rated Earth the way it did. It was not just that the planet was deadly. It was that the people who survived there had become something the galaxy had no category for. 6 levels above them, Lord Dresden was holding a banquet. The diplomatic summit was proceeding slowly, as all diplomatic summits did, and Dresden had grown bored. He hosted an evening feast in the station's grand hall and invited delegates from every attending species. The food was Felvari, heavy and rich, and most of the other species could barely choke it down, but nobody dared refuse. Halfway through the meal, a delegate from a smaller species called the Palori stood to make a toast. He was short, thin-limbed, with large dark eyes and a voice like rustling leaves. He spoke about cooperation between species and mutual respect. Dressen let him finish. Then he stood, walked to the Pelori delegate, and lifted him off the ground with one hand. He held the small alien at arm's length, feet dangling, and turned to the crowd. This, Dressen said, is what mutual respect looks like when one side has fragile bones. The crowd laughed nervously. The Pelori delegate hung in the air, trembling, saying nothing. Dressen set him down after a long, humiliating moment and returned to his seat. Captain Bren did not laugh. He watched the Pelori delegate return to his chair on shaking legs, and he watched the faces of the other delegates, and what he saw there was not respect. It was the cold, patient look of people counting the days until they could afford to stop pretending. After the banquet, a junior officer brought Bryn a report from the lower decks. The Deathworld human had been logged performing labor in hazardous conditions. Her physical output was 3 times the station average. Her endurance metrics were off the chart. Bryn brought the report to Dressen. Dressen read it, chuckled, and tossed it aside. "Impressive for a primitive," he said. "Perhaps I will invite her to carry my luggage." But he did not stop thinking about it. Bryn could tell, because Dressen asked, twice more that evening, whether there were any other reports about the human. Back in the grind, Ravi was teaching Nor how to braid rope. She had brought a spool of cord from Earth, and her fingers moved in a steady, repeating rhythm that Nor found hypnotic. With 4 hands, Nor picked up the technique quickly. "This is what you do to relax." Nor asked. "This is what I do to stay steady," Ravi said. "When you work with dangerous animals, your hands need to be busy or your mind gets too loud." Nor looked at her own 4 braided sections and felt, for the first time in a long while, something she had almost forgotten: calm. The rumor reached every corner of Galport Senna in less than a day. Someone said the Deathworld human had crushed a steel beam with her hands. Someone else said she had killed a dock crawler by looking at it. A third version claimed she ate metal for breakfast and breathed poison for fun. Ravi knew none of this. She was on her hands and knees in a drainage tunnel, clearing a blockage that had flooded 3 housing units in the grind. The water was cold and filthy, and something alive was moving in it, but Ravi had cleaned worse things out of irrigation ditches back home. 6 levels up, Lord Dressen was bored again. The summit talks had stalled over a trade agreement that nobody wanted to compromise on, and Dressen had no patience for paperwork. He paced the diplomatic suite like a caged predator, his bone plates clicking with every step, and finally turned to Captain Bren with an idea that made Bren's stomach sink. "I want a demonstration," Dressen said. "Open the exhibition arena. Announce a public challenge. Any species, any champion. Let them see what Felvari power looks like up close." Bren knew better than to argue. Within hours, the arena on level 4 was prepared. Seats filled. Cameras were set up. Dressen stood in the center of the floor in full ceremonial armor and issued his challenge to the gathered crowd. Nobody volunteered. He waited. He paced. He called out specific species by name, mocking their weakness, daring them to prove him wrong. The Pelori turned away. The Bravari shook their heads. A pair of Karathi fighters whispered to each other and stayed in their seats. Everyone remembered what had happened to the last Karathi who had accepted a Felvari challenge. 6 broken limbs. 3 months in medical recovery. Dressen laughed and spread his massive arms wide. "This is the galaxy? This is what fills the stars. Cowards and glass bones and species too soft to stand in front of me." The crowd said nothing. It was one of Dressen's officers who suggested the human. He had read the doc reports. He had seen the labor logs. A Deathworld creature with endurance ratings that broke the station's measurement scale. It would be entertaining, at least. A novelty. Something different. Dressen liked the idea immediately. He sent Captain Bren to the grind with a formal challenge invitation. It was written on embossed Felvari metal, stamped with Dressen's personal seal, and worded in the old diplomatic language that made refusal equivalent to species-wide dishonor. Bren found Ravi in the drainage tunnel. She was soaking wet, covered in grime, and holding something small and trembling in her cupped hands. A tunnel rat, one of the small vermin that lived in the station's lower pipes. It had cut its leg on a broken grate. She looked up at Bren, this scarred Felvari officer twice her size, and said, "One moment, please. I need to bandage this first." Bryn watched her tear a strip from her sleeve, wrapped the rat's leg with careful fingers, and set the animal gently into a dry crevice in the wall. Then she stood, wiped her hands on her trousers, and read the invitation. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. "It will be seen as cowardice on behalf of your species," Bryn said. He paused. "I do not write the rules." Ravi nodded. "I will come." Bryn returned to the upper levels with a feeling he could not name. He reported to Dressen that the human had accepted. Dressen was pleased, but Bryn added something that he knew his lord would not want to hear. She was not afraid. Dressen waved this off. "They never are until they see me." That evening, Nur found out about the challenge and nearly collapsed. She rushed to Ravi's quarters and found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, braiding rope. "You cannot go," Nur said, all four arms waving. "You do not understand." Dressen broke a Karathi fighter in half. "The Karathi are 3 times your size. He will kill you." Ravi continued braiding. "Tell me about him." "He is 9 feet tall. His bone plates can stop a plasma bolt. He has fought in 11 wars and never lost. They call him the Unbroken because nobody has ever put him down." "Why does he fight?" Ravi asked. Nur blinked. "What? Why does he fight? What does he want from it?" Nur had never thought about this. "He wants people to fear him. He wants everyone to know he is the strongest." Ravi nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she already suspected. She finished one braid and started another. "On Earth," she said quietly, "I once had to deal with a tiger that wandered into my village. A male, very large. He had been injured by poachers and was in terrible pain, and pain had made him aggressive. He was charging at everything. Walls, vehicles, people. What did you do?" Nur whispered. "I sat down in front of him." Nur stared. "The trick," Ravi said, "is knowing what the animal actually wants. Usually it is not a fight. It is an audience. It wants someone to see it, to acknowledge that it is hurting." She looked up at Nur. "Most of the time, the ones that roar the loudest are the ones that are the most afraid." Nur opened her mouth and closed it. She looked at Ravi's calm face and steady hands, and for the first time she realized something that the rest of the station had completely missed. The Deathworld girl was not walking into a fight. She was walking into a rescue. 3,000 seats filled the exhibition arena on level 4. Every single one was taken. Species that had not spoken to each other in decades sat shoulder to shoulder, all of them staring at the same empty floor below. Camera drones from the Galactic Press Network hovered overhead like metal insects, broadcasting the event live to 9 star systems. The arena floor was made of reinforced composite, rated to withstand orbital bombardment. It had cracks in it already from previous Felvari demonstrations. The far gate opened and Lord Dressen entered. He wore his full ceremonial armor, black plates over his natural bone ridges, edged with silver, each piece engraved with the name of a battle he had won. His footsteps shook the floor. He walked to the center of the arena and stood there, letting the crowd absorb the size of him. 9 feet of bone and muscle and fury, built by a species that had evolved on a high-gravity world where weakness was death. He raised his fists and roared. The sound hit the crowd like a physical force, deep and primal, vibrating through the seats. Several Pelori delegates covered their ears. A Quillen child in the upper rows began to cry. Then Dressen began his display. He smashed his fist into a stone pillar that had been erected at the arena's edge. It exploded into gravel. He grabbed a metal training dummy and bent it in half, then in half again, then threw the twisted remains into the wall hard enough to embed it. He pounded the arena floor with both fists and left craters in the composite. When he was finished, he stood in the center of the destruction, barely breathing hard, and addressed the crowd. "I have broken worlds," he said. "I have crushed armies beneath my feet. I have walked through fire and come out stronger. There is nothing in this galaxy that can stand before me and remain standing." The crowd was silent. This was the part where opponents usually forfeited. The opposite gate opened. Ravi walked out. She was wearing her work clothes. The same faded shirt, the same patched trousers, the same worn boots she had been wearing since she arrived on the station. No armor, no weapons, nothing. She walked to the center of the arena with an unhurried stride, the kind of walk that suggested she had all the time in the world and nowhere more important to be. Her hands hung relaxed at her sides. Her eyes were steady and clear. The crowd went so quiet that the hum of the station's air recyclers became the loudest sound in the room. Dressen looked down at her. He was nearly 3 times her height. His shadow covered her completely. Up close, the difference between them was almost absurd. She looked like a child standing in front of a mountain. "This is what Earth sends," Dressen said, loud enough for the entire arena to hear. "This is the terror of a death world." Ravi said nothing. She just looked at him. Dressen began his ritual. He circled her slowly, each step deliberate, each footfall heavy enough to send vibrations through the floor. He snarled. He bared his teeth, rows of flat, grinding plates designed to crush bone. He slammed his fist into the ground next to her feet, hard enough to crack the composite and send fragments skittering across the arena. Ravi did not flinch. He pounded his chest. The sound was like a war drum. He leaned down until his face was level with hers, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath, and he spoke in a low growl that the microphones barely picked up. "I have killed things larger than you with my bare hands. I have ripped ships apart. I have stood on the corpses of champions from 100 worlds. What are you?" Ravi looked into his eyes, and she smiled. Not a smirk, not a grin of defiance or a baring of teeth. A real smile, warm and calm, and full of something that Dressen had never seen directed at him before. It was the kind of smile a person gives when they see something hurt and frightened and pretending to be dangerous. The kind of smile that says, without any words, "I see you. I'm not your enemy. You do not have to do this." Dressen stopped. For one full second, he did not move. His fists stayed clenched. His body stayed coiled. But his eyes changed. Something flickered behind them, fast and confused, like a circuit that had received an input it was never designed to process. Then the second passed, and he charged. He swung a massive fist at her head. Ravi stepped to the side. Not jumped, not dove. Stepped, the way someone steps around a puddle on a sidewalk. His fist passed through the space where she had been and slammed into the floor. He spun and swung again. She ducked under his arm with a smooth, practiced motion that looked almost casual. His fist hit the arena wall behind her and left a dent the size of a dinner table. He kicked. She shifted her weight and let his leg pass in front of her, close enough to feel the wind of it. He grabbed at her with both hands. She turned her body sideways and slipped through the gap between his arms like water through fingers. She did not hit back. Not once. She did not raise her fists, did not tense her body, did not show any sign of aggression at all. She simply moved, always just out of reach, always calm, always watching him with those steady brown eyes. The crowd began to murmur. Noor, sitting in the lower seats with her 4 hands clamped over her face, peeked through her fingers and saw something impossible. The Deathworld girl was dancing. 7 minutes into the fight, and Lord Dressen had not landed a single blow. He had cracked the arena floor in 11 places. He had dented 2 walls. He had shattered a reinforced barrier post with a backhand swing that missed Ravi by less than a hand width. The destruction around him looked like the aftermath of a bombing, and the small human woman at the center of it all had not a scratch on her. The crowd had stopped murmuring. They were watching in complete, breathless silence. The kind of silence that happens when thousands of people realize at the same time that they're seeing something that has never happened before. Ravi moved the way she had always moved around dangerous animals. Fluid, patient, never sudden, never threatening, never turning her back. She read Dressen's body language the way she had once read the moods of elephants and tigers and wild dogs. She watched his shoulders for the tension that came before a swing. She watched his feet for the shift in weight that came before a charge. She watched his eyes for the moment when fury gave way to frustration. That moment came at the 8-minute mark. Dressen threw a massive overhead strike that should have driven Ravi through the floor. She sidestepped it cleanly. His fist hit the composite with enough force to send a shockwave through the entire arena level. The bone plates on his knuckles cracked. He roared in pain and swung again, wild and unfocused, and his elbow hit the arena wall at full speed. The crack echoed through the stands. Captain Bryn, watching from the officer's box on the upper tier, leaned forward in his seat. He had served Dressen for 11 years. He had seen his lord fight opponents twice his size and win in seconds. He had never seen this. Dressen was fighting himself. Every missed swing cost him energy. Every impact against the floor and walls damaged his own body. His armor was cracking. His bone plates, the natural shields that had stopped plasma bolts and blade strikes, were fracturing under the force of his own attacks, hitting immovable surfaces. He was pouring everything he had into destroying this small, quiet woman, and she was simply not there when the blows arrived. At the 10-minute mark, Dressen's breathing changed. The deep, controlled rhythm of a trained warrior became the ragged gasping of an animal that had been running too long. His charges slowed. His swings lost precision. He stumbled over a crack in the floor that he himself had made. Ravi maintained her distance. 3 meters. Always 3 meters. Close enough to be present. Far enough to be safe. She never ran. She never hid. She stayed in his line of sight, always facing him, always calm. Ner finally took her hands away from her face. She stared at the arena floor and realized what she was seeing. Ravi was completely uninjured. Not a bruise. Not a mark. She was not even breathing hard. In the officer's box, Bryn watched the Pelori delegate he had seen Dressen humiliate at the banquet. The small alien was sitting very still, his large dark eyes fixed on the arena floor, and on his face was an expression that Bryn recognized as hope. At the 12-minute mark, Dressen stopped. He stood in the center of the ruined arena, heaving for air. His ceremonial armor was cracked in a dozen places. His fists were bleeding through the bone plates. His legs trembled with exhaustion. Sweat and blood dripped onto the broken floor beneath him. Ravi stood 3 meters away. Her shirt was dusty. Her braid had come slightly loose. That was the full extent of the damage she had sustained. The arena was so quiet that Nor could hear the click of camera drones adjusting their lenses. Ravi spoke. Her voice was soft, but the arena's acoustics were designed to carry sound, and every word reached every seat. "You are tired," she said. "You are hurting yourself. You can stop now." Dressen stared at her. His chest heaved. His eyes were wide and wild, but somewhere underneath the fury and the confusion, something else was surfacing. Something old and buried and raw. Nobody had ever told him he could stop. His whole life, from the brutal training camps of his youth to the endless wars of his career, every voice had said the same thing. Harder, stronger, more. Never stop. Never show weakness. Break everything in front of you or be broken yourself. And now this small creature from a planet that should have killed her 1,000 times over was standing in front of him, unhurt and unafraid, and telling him that he did not have to keep going. His knee buckled. He dropped to one knee, not in surrender, but because his body simply could not hold him anymore. The impact of his knee hitting the floor sent one final crack spreading across the composite. The crowd gasped. 3,000 beings rose in their seats. They expected what came next in every gladiator story they had ever heard. The killing blow. The moment of triumph. The foot on the fallen warrior's chest. Ravi walked toward him. She knelt beside him, slowly and carefully, the way she knelt beside injured animals in the forests of her homeworld. She reached out and placed one small, calloused hand on his cracked shoulder plate. "On my world," she said, quiet enough that only he and the closest microphones could hear, "the strongest creatures are not the ones that fight the hardest. They're the ones that know when fighting is not the answer." Dressen looked at her hand on his shoulder. He looked at her face. And for the first time in his adult life, the expression on his face was not fury or pride or contempt. It was confusion. And underneath the confusion, barely visible, something that might have been gratitude. The footage hit the galactic networks within an hour. By the end of the day, it had been viewed on every inhabited world in 9-star systems. By the end of the week, it had been translated into 400 languages and was still spreading. Nobody could agree on what to call it. The Pelori press called it the silence of the arena. The Bravari networks titled it When the Mountain Knelt. The Felvari state media tried to bury it entirely, but the footage was everywhere copied and shared and impossible to erase. A 9-foot warlord in cracked armor on his knees, and a small human woman kneeling beside him with her hand on his shoulder, and a look on his face that no amount of propaganda could explain away. Diplomats argued about what it meant. Military analysts broke down every second of the encounter, trying to classify the human's technique. Combat experts from 6 species published papers disagreeing with each other about whether what happened was a fight, a surrender, a performance, or something else entirely. Nobody asked Ravi. She had gone back to the grind and picked up a double shift clearing drainage tunnels. Lord Dressen retreated to his flagship and did not come out for 2 days. Captain Bren was the only one allowed near him. He found Dressen sitting in his private quarters, still wearing the cracked remnants of his ceremonial armor. He had not eaten. He had not slept. He was staring at the wall with an expression that Bren had never seen on his face in 11 years of service. It was not anger. It was not shame. It was the look of a man who had just discovered a door in a room he thought had no exits. She looked at me, Dressen said, without turning around. Bren waited. She looked at me the way no one has looked at me since I was small. Dressen's voice was low and rough, stripped of the performance it usually carried. Before the training camps, before the wars, before they taught me that softness was death. Bren said nothing. He had learned long ago that the most useful thing he could do for his lord was stand still and listen. My father broke my first set of bone plates when I was 6, Dressen continued. He said they would grow back stronger. He was right. They did. Everything grew back stronger. Everything except the parts that mattered. He finally looked at Bren. His eyes were red. Not from crying, because Felvari did not cry, but from something equally raw. How does she do it, he asked. How does a creature from a world that should have made her into a monster become that? Gentle, calm, not afraid of anything, and still kind. Bren did not have an answer, but he had a report. The summit delegates were asking about the human, not with fear or with hostility, but with something new. The Pelori, who had been too intimidated to negotiate with the Felvari for years, had submitted 3 new trade proposals overnight. 2 smaller species had requested direct talks. The entire tone of the summit had shifted. Dressen's display of power had kept species in line for decades. One afternoon of a human woman's quiet refusal to fight had done more to change the political landscape than 100 warships. Dressen understood this. Bren could see it in his face. The old way was breaking, and it was breaking not because someone had beaten it with a bigger fist, but because someone had shown the galaxy that fists were not the only option. Back in the grind, Ravi sat on her usual cargo crate and ate rice and lentils from her container. Nur sat beside her, still vibrating with leftover shock. Ow! Nur finally managed. How were you not afraid? Ravi chewed and thought about it. He reminded me of a bull elephant I once met. Young male, separated from his herd too early. He charged at everything. Walls, trees, vehicles, people. The whole village was terrified of him. What happened? I sat with him. It took 3 days. I just sat near him, not moving, not threatening, not running away. On the 3rd day, he stopped charging. He came and stood next to me and made a sound that elephants make when they are calling for their mothers. Ravi paused. All that rage was just loneliness wearing armor. Nur looked at her and felt something shift inside her chest, a rearrangement of everything she thought she knew about strength. A week passed. The summit continued, but differently now. Species negotiated as equals. The Felvari delegates attended meetings without their ceremonial weapons for the first time in recorded history. Something had cracked open, and through the crack, light was getting in. On the 8th day, Dressen came to the grind. He came alone. No guards, no officers, no armor. He wore plain clothes, simple Felvari civilian garments that Bren had to dig out of the storage locker because Dressen had not owned casual clothing in 20 years. He was still enormous, still intimidating by sheer physical presence, but he carried himself differently. His shoulders were lower. His fists were open. He found Ravi in the lower docks, repairing a loading crane that had jammed. She looked up at him and waited. He stood there for a long moment, this warlord who had conquered star systems and he looked like a child standing at the edge of something he did not understand. "Can you teach me?" he asked. His voice was quiet. "How to do what you did. How to be still." Ravi smiled. The same smile from the arena. Warm and calm and impossibly kind. "Sit down," she said. "We will start with breathing." Bryn heard about it later from Noor, who had watched the whole thing from behind a supply container with all four hands pressed against her mouth. The most feared warlord in 3-star systems, sitting cross-legged on a cargo crate beside a small human woman, eyes closed, learning to breathe. Noor told Bryn that she had watched for almost an hour, and in that hour, she saw Dressen's face change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like ice melting in spring. The rigid mask of fury and performance softened into something that looked almost like peace. Bryn nodded and said nothing, but later that night, alone in his quarters, he pulled up the galactic hazard file on Earth and read it again from the beginning. Toxic atmosphere, crushing gravity, extreme weather, predators on every continent, diseases that mutated faster than medicine could chase them. And yet the humans who came out of that hell were not the monsters the galaxy expected. They were people who sat with wounded elephants and pulled snakes off children and smiled at warlords until the warlords forgot how to fight. Noor had said it best, in her own stumbling way, when Bryn asked her what she thought the most dangerous thing about humans was. She thought for a long time, all four hands folded in her lap, and then she said, "It is not their strength. It is not that they come from a world that should have killed them. It is that after everything that world did to them, they still choose to be kind. And they're so stubborn about it that eventually kindness wins." Bryn closed the file and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about a girl who smiled at a mountain and the mountain knelt.